start this right now. All right, so welcome to ICF San Antonio chapter and to today's event, which is part of our series called Coach Connect. And Coach Connect happen every month at the end of the month on a Tuesday at this time, at lunchtime. And these are informal conversations, interviews with coaches within our region and beyond that we want to learn from. Maybe they coach in some area that is of high interest, or maybe they have a topic to share that's highly timely and relevant, like the one today. And we want to remind you again that we are recording. Why are we recording? Because there are a lot of people who want to be here today, cannot be here today for some reason. And so we're going to make this available to all of our members and non-members. Somebody has an open mic, if you don't mind. Thank you so much. And so if the purpose of these conversations is to be open, to share, and sometimes we share things that are maybe intimate or we feel very vulnerable. So if at any time you feel uncomfortable with a recording, just let us know. There's an email address at the bottom of your screen that we ask you to contact, and we will make sure that we edit that content if necessary. A couple of announcements before we begin. We have a peer coaching program at ICF San Antonio. And so this is a lot of fun. We have, I would say, the majority of our members participating in it right now. And so this is a great way to earn paid coaching hours toward your accreditation. Number two, learn from each other, make new friends, and give and receive feedback. So we're having some very positive experiences. If you haven't done this before, we strongly encourage you to contact us and find out more. By the way, I'm Susana Clavello, and I am the president of ICF San Antonio. Today with me is Paula Miles, who's also one of our members. We have Melissa Zamides, Andy, who are also members of the chapter. All right. Every month, first Thursday of the month at 6 p.m., we invite everybody, whether you're a new member or you just want to inquire about ICF San Antonio, get to know us, who we are, what we do, whether you would like to, perhaps consider joining the chapter, we invite you to attend one of our membership orientations. And this is just very informal, but we're going to give you a quick tour and overview of the things that we do that we're very, very proud of, and also get to know each other. So please sign up on our events page. It's completely free. On the screen, it says 6 to 6:30. It's been more like 45 minutes with Q&A, but it's been really engaging. All right, now without further ado, who do we have today? Well, we have somebody I'm going to introduce to you in just a second. We're going to first discuss a topic today that is not just timely, but it's critical to the well-being of individuals, of families, and of organizations. And the incidence, I don't know if you've seen the recent statistics, but in the last year and a half, the incidence of burnout has soared. And not just burnout, but other situations of mental wellness, such as depression and anxiety and other things. But burnout is definitely on the top list. And so this has happened in unprecedented levels during the last year and a half, to the point where many individuals and organizational leaders experience some degree of burnout. It may happen to us at any point in our lives. It may happen to our clients. It's really important for us to understand this, know how to recognize it, know what to do about it as coaches, and make some wise decisions. And so today we're going to learn all of this from Dr. Stanley Ward. So Stan is a writer, he's an educator, and he's also a leadership coach with decades of experience. His writing work includes blog articles, 2 leadership books, and an online course about this topic that he's going to talk to us about toward the end of his presentation. And more about Stanley is as an educator, he holds a PhD in leadership studies, served as an instructor, curriculum writer, and administrator in secondary and also higher education. He's a frequent presenter for the International Leadership Association's Global Conference and a guest on various podcasts. And as a coach, his clients include both leaders and business owners in profit and nonprofit settings. During his free time, get this, Stan is a Tai Chi practitioner, a cyclist, a fountain pen enthusiast, and an avid ukulele strummer who likes to sing along with his daughters and wife. So Stan, without further ado, let me introduce you to Stan. It's all yours, Stan. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I felt like I had to reach for my there we go, fountain pen, just to prove. Don't worry, I won't make you listen to me play ukulele. We can do that another time. So thank you for the opportunity to share with you guys. Hopefully this should be coming up where everyone can see. I want to talk with you about how to beat burnout. This is something that's near and dear to me, and we'll start with why that is the case. So, as Susanna mentioned, I've been an educator for years, and I'm convinced that over every educator's lectern, there should be a sign that says WGAD. Why give a darn? We'll keep it PG, right? And so I want to start with that. So even before all the silliness of 2020, right, in 2019, the WHO recognized that burnout was a workplace phenomena, and it began to classify it in its international disease classifications, as well as the fact that during 2019, Gallup was doing research that they actually released in 2020, but they found that 76% of full-time employees reported being burned out at least some of the time. So pre-COVID, pre all the unrest of 2020, burnout was with us. What's fascinating is, and I just read this yesterday as I was reviewing some material from the Harvard Business Review. So last year, Harvard Business Review does a study on burnout and workplace stress, and their results were 89% of their respondents said things were getting worse in 2020 than they were in 2019. So there's a strong case for folks feeling a lot of stress and in one way or another not having the resources to address that. And this is important for me personally, and I'll tell you a little bit of my story. So I finished my PhD in 2013, defended my dissertation successfully, 40-year-old male, healthy. And 1 week later, I was in the hospital with a bowel obstruction that was severe enough that really I went for months struggling just to be able to eat solid food. We couldn't quite figure out exactly what was going on. I fought this condition in a series of intestinal infections for about 2 years. The local prognosis was really dire. There was literally a conversation where we said, Stan, let's talk about quality of life for you. So at that point, my wife and I went to the Mayo Clinic up in Rochester, Minnesota. And there for 2 weeks, I was poked and prodded by the best medical minds in the nation, if not the world. And after 2 weeks of poking and prodding and measuring a variety of things, the doctor sat me down and he said, Mr. Ward, tell me how you deal with stress. And I thought, you have got to be kidding me. Stress can be a very real threat especially for the leaders. I heard we're dealing with healthcare leadership, and oh my goodness, my wife actually is a nurse and works in a call center to help people basically figure out if they've got to go to the ER or if they can wait. Frontline COVID worker essentially in that space. We hear about academics. You think about all the stresses that colleges were already under a variety of stresses related to just demographic changes. Folks, higher ed is really feeling a lot of pressure right now from a variety of sources. And then you throw in the challenges of a pandemic and do you do Zoom or meet in person, mask, not mask, all these issues. Heard several people talking about working with business leaders or mental health issues, which of course, this is what we're speaking to here, as well as just general leadership. I think about one of the things we've seen over the last 20 years or so is this continual decline in the average tenure of senior leaders, right? All this stuff is swirling together, and that's why we need to give a darn about burnout. So with that introduction, I have 5 goals for today. And so what I plan to do is do a bit of a forced march. I usually prefer more of a Socratic dialogue, but I want to make sure I get this information to you so that it will serve you. I'm also going to plan to share my slides afterwards, and there'll be some additional notes in the notes section of the slides to help. So don't feel like you have to catch all the information with us. But first, I want to distinguish between burnout and worn out. I believe that burnout has become a bit of a buzzword, and so we need to clarify what we're really talking about. 2, I want to provide you a tool for raising awareness about burnout. 3, I want to help you clarify a mindset for beating burnout. 4, I want us to evaluate the power of using small experiments to make progress on burnout. And then 5, we're going to end with some time on when we need to refer out. Okay. So before I go any further in the chat, are there any questions or concerns about our goals for today? All right, I'm going to keep us marching. First, let's talk about burnout versus worn out. I am convinced, both based on really personal experience as much as anything else, that the term burnout has really become a buzzword. You may just hear people say, gosh, I'm so burned out. They kind of throw that in as an aside. Of course, the problem is that if you're in a workplace setting and you say that, right, what are the implications, right? Or what does it mean if a physician were to say, gosh, I'm feeling burned out, or a business leader starts to say, gee, I'm feeling burned out? They can lose trust, right? People may begin to suspect, oh, they may be on their way out the door. It can cost them future promotions. So this term burnout can be emotionally loaded, and folks can have a hard time maybe bringing it up. And if they do bring it up, they may not actually be burned out. It may be something else. So I want to distinguish between burnout and worn out. So here's the difference. Think of a car engine, okay? Think about the difference between when that car engine is out of gasoline versus when it is out of oil. So if I'm driving along and I just run out of gas, what happens to my car engine? It kind of stops, right? And in order to get going again, what do I need to do? Well, essentially, I rest and refuel, right? I mean, I have to stop, put fuel in it, and then I can go again. That's essentially being worn out. It's that physical tired where we simply need to rest and refuel, and we can get going again. And certainly, as we look at the demands on workers, folks may be working from home, and so they've got weird hours. It's affecting their sleep. There's a lot of different things going on. For some folks, this malaise could be a case of just being worn out and not true burnout. What's burnout? Well, think about when that same car engine runs out of oil. What's fascinating here is the engine can continue to run for a time based on kind of the residual lubricant that's in the engine, right? Yet, the whole time it's running, what is it doing? It's damaging itself. And if it keeps running in that deficient state, eventually it sees up and destroys itself. That's burnout. Burnout is about continuing to run in a state where we're out of the resources we need to bear up under the pressures of life. Okay? And so we're going to break that down even further. According to research from Christina Maslach that goes back, I believe the research started in the 70s, it began to be published there in the 80s. There are 3 dimensions to burnout. Part of my journey into getting into burnout is, again, I do leadership coaching, and a couple years ago, I finished a textbook on ethical leadership. I was part of a team that put that textbook together, and was also working as a dean at a university. And I didn't want to completely lose my coaching business and all that. And I realized, gosh, I really need to find somewhere to plant my flag and to focus, just to help me keep a coaching practice that has some momentum. And as I began to do reflection on the leaders that I really enjoyed working with, I realized that the leaders I connected with were people who cared about both results and relationships. They're working on both those spaces. That put an extra strain on them that made them prone to some piece of burnout, because the research tells us that burnout is not a switch that's off or on. It's more of a continuum or a spectrum. And we're all on the spectrum on these issues, these dimensions in various places. It's just a question of whether we're in a place that's healthy or not, or a place where we're able to be high functioning or not. So those 3 dimensions are emotional exhaustion, which you might think of as just simple overload. Again, that simple feeling of, you wake up in the morning and you think, gosh, I just don't have the energy to do this today, right? And to have that over and over and over again. Okay, there's your emotional exhaustion. Depersonalization is the second dimension. You might think of that as sort of a robot-like experience in life or in work. It's a disconnect from people, a disconnect from purpose. The literature describes it as a kind of cynicism. The third factor is a lack of effectiveness. Again, this sense of ineffectiveness. What's interesting here is the biggest predictor of that burnout experience is emotional exhaustion. The second then being the depersonalization. And then the lack of effectiveness is not as large a predictor. It doesn't seem to have as large of an influence on the burnout experience. But when we have all 3 of those together in high amounts, that's when we have true burnout. Otherwise, it's something else. So remember, with our ICF core competencies, and I wrote a couple of these down. Competency number 6 is about active listening. Competency number 7 is about raising awareness. And so as we move into a tool for awareness, I want you to think of this in terms of a tool that you can use in practicing competency number 6, that active listening, and competency number 7, raising awareness. And I want to call this the Burnout Checkup. So as I was doing research for the book, How to Beat Burnout for Yourself, Your Family, and Your Team, my oldest daughter was a senior in high school, and she mentioned to me one day, gosh, Dad, I'm just so burned out. And I thought, oh, fascinating. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm doing a little bit of research on this, and if you'll let me take you to BJ's and buy you a Pizookie, because she loves Pizookies. If you'll let me buy you a Pizookie, I would like to have a conversation with you about what you're experiencing and try out a couple theories, okay? And so that's where I first tested this tool. And it's actually one of the places where I really just began to realize this difference between burnout and worn out. So with that introduction, let's take a look at the tool. What I ask that you do is take a sheet of paper. If you have a journal, a sheet of notebook paper, and essentially create 3 10-point scales. And I'll kind of show you what we're talking about here. So think of a number. Oh man, Zoom is doing a Zoom thing. Okay, now you can kind of see that, right? Create like a number line. And it can be horizontal or vertical. It doesn't matter. but you want a 10-point scale, and you want 3 of those, okay? So at the low end of the scale, of each scale, for 1, you want to write emotional exhaustion or the term overload. For the next scale, at the bottom of that scale, you want to write disconnect or cynicism, or use the scientific term depersonalization if you're feeling very scholarly. And then for the third one, right, ineffectiveness, right? So the bottom of the scale is going to be overload. The bottom of another scale is going to be cynicism, disconnect, and the bottom of a third scale will be ineffectiveness. Okay, here's some of that awareness raising and letting you engage your self-awareness here. I ask that you take a moment to think about what is the opposite of those 3 for you. In other words, what is the exact opposite, the total opposite of overload? And call that the 10. What is the total opposite of disconnect and cynicism? Call that the 10. Or what is the total opposite of complete ineffectiveness? Call that the 10. I'll give you a moment to do that, and then I'll give you some of the theory behind why we're doing this. Yeah, and as I'm looking at this slide, this is such a case study in why you shouldn't put. I'm giving away the punchline, so just ignore that. We'll pretend that the punchline isn't there as far as those next steps. Let me just pause to talk theory a little bit with you. So there is a psychologist named William James, is considered the father of American psychology. He was at Harvard University toward the end of the 19th century, so late 1800s. And he does this book called The Varieties of Religious Experience in America. And I had to take a class on philosophy of religion in college, and this is like the only thing I took away from the book. He makes this observation that more people are running away from sin rather than running toward righteousness. In other words, more people are running away from the bad stuff rather than pursuing the good stuff. It's one of his observations. That has always stuck with me. And I think there's a principle here for how we help raise awareness around burnout and help address it with this tool. That's why we're not just saying overload, disconnect, and ineffectiveness. We don't want to just think about what we're running away from. We also want to be aware of what we are running toward. You know, if my sweet wife says, Stan, don't be such a jerk, I need more specific guidance. Right? I know not to be an idiot. I know not to be a jerk, right? Or at least I hope I do on you know, most days. I need something specific to run toward. It's the same principle here. And then the other thing is, remember in the literature, burnout is not a switch that we flip off or on. It's a spectrum. All of us are experiencing some measure of overload, some measure of disconnect, some measure of ineffectiveness. It's just a question of how much it's impacting us, okay? So what I want you to do now is on your number line for each of those 3 measurements, mark where you are now. So here's the $1,000,000 question. What does this tell you? And at this point, I actually want to hit pause and sort of open it up to some conversation. What are some of the insights that are coming up?
I'm not burned out.
Yeah, okay. So how is that helpful?
Well, I think what it does for me, it begins to put into perspective the places I might need to focus on to develop a more balance. And so it's not an all or nothing thing. And it's almost like a, okay, thank goodness I'm not burned out. Okay, I can handle that. Let me focus on those 1 or 2 areas where I need to bring more balance.
Yeah, and you're working with healthcare, right?
No.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was trying to keep track of who was doing what. Okay. Yeah, thank you for this story, because so when I did this exercise with my oldest daughter, what we found was basically the lowest score was on the emotional exhaustion piece. The other 2 were fine. They were like 7/8. They were hitting, you know, what for her she felt was healthy. And so while she thought she was burned out, the real problem was she was just exhausted. And it was glorious, because I said, okay, what do you want to do with that? She's like, gosh, Dad, I guess I should start going to bed earlier. Yeah.
Stan, we have a comment in the chat from Tiana.
Yes, please.
And, you know, it says to me that something probably needs to change fast because I'm close to burnout.
Okay. Yeah. And we'll start to dig into what that could look like here in a little bit.
Back to the tool, Stan, what I think it also tells me is how effective are my coping mechanisms? Less.
Yeah. So could you say a little more about that?
Well, the way I understand stress is it's not that we can avoid stress, because stress will always be present in our life, but it's how we build in renewal mechanisms to balance that out. And so what the results that I guess that I have here tell me that I'm probably putting in place enough good mechanisms to recharge so that I can handle the amount of stress that I'm under.
Yeah, and for me, that's been one of the big shifts, is to be aware of the need for me to have intentional systems for rest and recharge. When I was doing some of this work, doing some of the research on this, I got to have a conversation with a university president just about something else, and told him I was doing some research on burnout, and he began to share some of his story that he had about a year previously, he had gone to Bermuda for a 2-week vacation, and when he got back, he felt no better than when he left. And he realized something was wrong. He said what was interesting, though, is shortly after that, he reconnected on one of his pet projects that was just really significant to him personally. And as he began to engage in that project, he found himself more energized than he was by going to Bermuda for a vacation. The way I read that is there's that second dimension, that depersonalization or disconnect. He took action on that second dimension, and in doing so and reconnecting to purpose, it helped get him back into a healthier state.
I love that, Stan. Thank you for sharing that. And I really like how you pointed also to what are we running to? That's just wonderful. And I made a little list for myself here. The opposites of the 3 points that you were bringing up there. And the opposites for me that came up were support, balance, total, well-rounded health, holistic, optimism, faith, hope, positivity, and inspiration, and effective solutions in place with issues being fixed.
Hmm.
So I just thank you for also stressing that, because I think it is imperative that we always know what the goals are so that we can uh, move toward reaching them and be running toward the right goals. Um, and as Susanna said, really using our best coping mechanisms or gathering what we need so that we can really achieve uh, the the optimal states that we want and results um, for ourselves personally, professionally, for our loved ones, etc.
And if I may build on that too, the importance of allowing each of us to use our own language to define what that opposite state is. And I see this as part of the coaching process. I mean, I'm an academic, I got a term for everything. It's easy for me to sort of use my language for the client rather than letting the client use their language. That's something I'm constantly having to monitor against. So one part of the value of this tool for me is they tell me what that ideal state is. They use their words. And so we create a model that's personalized to them using their language.
I really like that. I totally agree. I know it's just as a coach myself as well. And thank you for what you're doing and what you've written and you're teaching everything. Yes, it's so important that our clients find it in themselves, put it in their own words, own what they care about, what motivates them. And I love what you said too about pet projects. Um, I've been working on a book during this time, and I find that that really lifts my spirits. Oh my gosh, getting into that just helps a lot. So thank you for what you're bringing to this and where you're guiding people, because this is wonderful stuff.
Yeah, well, thank you for that positive feedback. Yeah, and I sympathize with the need to write. Yeah, that's, for me, that's a happy place. So that's cool. I'm going to keep moving forward. So the next deal I want to talk about is this idea of check your mindset. So once we've raised awareness with clients, and by the way, one of the things I'll do with this tool also is I might say, okay, where are you now? And it's the classic coaching maneuver. Where do you want to be, right? What's the next step that's going to help you get there? That kind of language. So you can come back to these this assessment tool over and over, or this checkup tool over and over. But often one of the first things that we have to do to help people make this shift is we've got to check mindsets. And there's two things to consider here. The first is that self-care is not selfish. For me, this is one of the biggest obstacles. And even though I've written on this and shared some of my story with Mayo Clinic and that sort of thing, I still struggle with this. I think some of it for me is I grew up in a family that my mother and father both grew up on the farm, and they were just very poor, and life was just about subsistence, right? I mean, it was just work. Life was work. And so because of that, it's really easy for me to kind of fall into that. Hey man, life's just work, and you just got to get stuff done, right? Well, the problem was, and part of my story too, so while I was doing my PhD, I was working full time. We had two young children. My parents are divorced, and I'm a single child. So my mother was having a lot of health issues. We moved her down here to Tyler, and we're trying to help kind of keep up with her. And my wife had a car accident, and she was a brain injury survivor. So she spent like a year just kind of in bed. And so all this stuff's going on. And to some extent to say, well, life's just about work. It served me to an extent that I was able to finish the darn PhD. You know, they call those things a terminal degree for a reason, right? Something's going to die. But I'm being. Yet there was a cost, because although it did help serve me to an extent, that model wasn't robust enough to really help get me through that season, right? So as I work for myself on self-care is not selfish, and as I work with clients on this mindset shift, that's where the title of the book came out, and that's what the book gets into. Our motivation for beating burnout, our motivation for self-care is not just about us. If we are leaders in organizations or communities, if we have a family that we want to either provide for or be of service to in some way, then that self-care, that beating of burnout, it's about ourselves, it's about our families, it's about our teams and our communities. And remember earlier how we talked about the idea of a car engine and burnout, right? That if you don't keep oil in the car, eventually the engine's going to seize up and break. We don't think of car maintenance as a selfish activity, right? And in that car, even if it's a big old SUV, you're probably not going to have more than 8 people in that thing. So if you're willing to do maintenance on a car that's only hauling sort of a handful of people, and yet you think about the network of people that are influenced by you, why wouldn't you provide some sort of self-maintenance on yourself as well, some self-care? Let me hit pause because we do have a little bit of time. What reflections are coming up as we have that conversation?
One of the things that come out for me, Stan, is you work with leaders, right? Leaders that are responsible, not just for themselves, their families, their teams, but perhaps the whole organization. And how do you help create that awareness that self-care is a priority when they have so many other priorities?
Yeah, so I'm hearing this is a tactical question then. A lot of it is asking some yeah. So we'll create a scenario, right? So let's say I'm speaking with a COO, CEO. Well, actually, I had a conversation a couple of years ago with someone, and basically said, "How much stuff are you willing to destroy for this? How many things are you willing to break here?" Because this was a gentleman who ran multiple companies, who also gave a lot of money to different charities. I mean, a lot of people were dependent on him. And so to say, all right, you're thinking about just checking out, blowing up on this. How many things do you want to break? Because that's what's going to happen. And for him, that kind of helped him get that awareness. Again, I think helping people think in terms of, okay, in order to achieve the mission, what's required here? What state of mind do you need in order to do this well? Tell me about when you're at a high functioning state. Tell me about how that benefits your organization. All right. Where are you now? Tell me what the cost of that is to the organization. Things like that can be helpful.
I really love that you pointed that out. That makes great sense. And I really like what you said earlier too, if I got this quote down correctly from William James. More people are running away from sin than pursuing righteousness. I since you're asking for feedback, I just really enjoy that because, again, personally, just if a person has the concept that people are born in original sin. God is harsh, life is harsh, everything is constant judgment. Um, and with all these possible negative consequences all the time looming, um, that's one perception, that's um, one mindset. So, however, if somebody believes that we have a loving God and that we are born in original blessing and that we are being blessed all the time, and even though life is challenging, um, we are loved and we are supported in so many miraculous ways. That just shifts the entire perception of who we are, our relationship to life, our relationship to people, um, our relationship to what we think we can do in the world, what we can affect. So I just say that because you talked about the cynicism, and I think that that ties in. That I know I've helped clients sometimes have to really get to that root of weeding out, per se, the sense that, everything's harsh and they're constantly being judged, and this very negative um, worldview or universe idea, and uh, tune into an amazing love, um, because when we tune into that, when we feel that for ourselves, for others, for the world, um, it changes everything. So I really like that you just posed that question, because I think that helping our clients um, sometimes grow and shift into those ideas. I mean,
I need to interrupt just for the sake of time, just to make a couple points here. Yeah. One, the William James is kind of a paraphrase. So if you were to try to find that exact quote, you may struggle to find it just for the sake of due diligence. The second thing, though, and you are bringing up an important point, is that sense of chronic fight or flight, right? So whether it's because of a theological construct that has a person, or a philosophical construct, a worldview that has a person in a constant state of existential angst for one reason or another, whether it is the CEO who's, this phrase, head on a swivel, right? CEO is just constantly looking for threats to the organization. If there's not some mechanism to release some of that stress, to get back into a relaxed state, to get back into the rest and digest state, okay, burnout is going to happen. We also know that when people are under just chronic stress, that executive brain functioning starts to diminish. There are real consequences there. And this can also go back to how do you get people to see the value of self-care? You could go to the science and you can show folks, hey, you're an executive decision maker. The longer you're under prolonged stress without any relief, we know your ability to make executive decisions diminishes. Okay? So some of that language can be helpful as well. The second thing I want to go to, and this gets into the healthcare conversation. So there are a lot of docs right now. I've worked with some doctors as part of this, and that was actually part of the inspiration for this as well, was thinking, gosh, these healthcare providers take care of us, and who's taking care of them? As I was doing some of the research on burnout, I realized this was a huge, again, pre-2020, this was already a huge issue in the healthcare profession. When you bring up this idea to a doctor, hey, this is about self-care, or this is about resilience, a lot of time you're going to get a lot of pushback, right? I was able to get myself through medical school. Don't tell me I'm not resilient, right? One, it could be that there are some assumptions about what resilience means that aren't serving them. So I've had conversations with doctors where we've sort of redefined resilience about not just plowing through obstacles, but about systems for self-maintenance. That shift helps. But also this. So Maslach's also done some, so there's the Maslach Burnout Inventory, the MBI. Anyone can administer it. There is a technical manual you'd want to read for some guidelines, and that will help people get a basically statistically validated, reliable survey on these three dimensions. Basically, this Burnout Checkup is the Stanley J. Ward show. So I find it to be effective, but I'm not claiming it is scientifically validated statistically, just to be clear there. So the MBI is the tool you'd want in that case. There's also a tool called the AWS, the Areas of Work-Life Survey. The Areas of Work-Life Survey measures these 6 things, right? Unsustainable workload, perceived lack of control, insufficient rewards for effort, lack of a supportive community, lack of fairness, mismatched values and skills. So whereas the first tool helps us get clarity on sort of the internal state for the client, this Areas of Work-Life Survey, going beyond self-care, looking at what's going on in the organization, that's going to look at the external piece. And so I find it helpful to have both of these in mind. Because yes, in all fairness to folks who are experiencing burnout, it's not all just self-care. Some of it is about managing these external pressures and forces that are happening. In summary, though, when external pressures exceed internal resources, collapse is inevitable. So that's why I do like to start with this idea of self-care, but also make room for these other spaces and look at how we can address them in coaching. All right, so how do I help clients make progress on this? Well, I use a concept called small experiments that help create big change. Remember that core competency number 8 is about facilitating client growth. So this concept of small experiments is a tool that I use to help facilitate client growth. Why do I use small experiments? Well, if we're talking about, burnout, right? Folks are exhausted, they're overloaded. So we don't need to burden them with some large mountain that they have to climb. They're already low on resources. I have this picture of Big League Chew here. When I was a kid, I used to love to go to the grocery store and buy this stuff. There is a part of me that I call Big League Jimmy because he's always swinging for the fences, right? And if I'm not careful, Big League Jimmy will just wear me out. I will put way more time, energy, and effort into things than I need to in order to get things done. So using the model of small experiments helps keep Big League Jimmy from taking over. The other thing is, and we're going to talk about how these experiments work, but there's a real focus on what are we learning rather than thinking in terms of binary success or failure. How does that work? Well, we want to clarify the larger goal. So let's say you've gone through one of these instruments. Maybe you've just done the Burnout Checkup and you realize, okay, depersonalization seems to be the place this person is struggling the most. So let's clarify that goal of, okay, when you're fully engaged in relationship, when you're fully connected with your sense of purpose, what is that? All right, great. That's the larger goal we're going toward. What's one opportunity? What's one small act that we can help you take? Let's design a small experiment where you can take action and see if it helps get you closer to that ideal state in some way that you're able to notice or measure. They take the action between sessions, and their job is to focus not so much on the success or failure of the action, but to focus on, okay, you took this action. What did you learn by taking that action? Remember, one of the problems or one of the dimensions of burnout is a sense of ineffectiveness. So if we start talking success or failure, we may only be playing into that. So let's focus on what we're learning and how we can apply that to get us closer to the next step as we move toward that more ideal state. So this then becomes an iterative process that we can bring up in each of our coaching sessions to help the client get momentum. And again, we're not exhausting them. This doesn't require huge amounts of energy. There's not this sense of success or failure because the emphasis really is on, okay, what are you learning? How can we apply that? How can you apply that? Okay, so what does the next step look like for you? Great. How do you think that's going to get you closer to this ideal goal? What makes that so important right now? Okay. Now, what might be some of the obstacles for that? Okay, so how can you design for that? Great, sounds good. Okay, I can't wait to hear you your story about taking that step when we get together next. That's kind of how these conversations go. I do also want to address briefly, because I'm going to take about 5 more minutes here, thoughts on referrals. Remember that core competency number 1 is demonstrates ethical practice. And item number 7 on that is basically about referring out to other supporting professionals. There are times in this burnout space that it may not just be burnout. It may be burnout and something else, or it may be something that at first we think is burnout, but in reality is something else. In particular, as I got to digging into this, I really became concerned about the relationship between burnout and depression. And again, when I share the slides, this is a Google Doc that I can share with you that I got from some friends who are counselors. Notice depression shows up as diminished interest in all activities. Burnout can show up as diminished interest in activities. Depression can show up as a depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day. Burnout can show up as feeling unable to slow down, fear of what happens if one rests. Okay, so there's some distinctive differences there. The point of this chart is to show there are places where these are similar, places where they are different. So because of that, I just want to encourage you, as coaches, we have to know our limits, right? And so if clients seem to be stuck, they're having a hard time making progress, if you suspect that there's something else at play here besides some piece of burnout where you're able to help them take meaningful action, please have a network. Be aware of a network of other providers who can help, and know where you're able to specialize and where you're not. I would mention to you that just this week, Meg Rentschler's Star Coach podcast addressed this issue. So please go back, listen to that podcast. There's some great information there. I'm thinking about a story where early on, as I was getting my coaching business up, had someone refer to me who was struggling with PTSD, or not PTSD, excuse me, ADHD. And as I listened to his story and how it was impacting him, I just realized, I'm not really a specialist on this, but I know someone who is. And so referring people out appropriately. So the last thing is I just want to make you aware of some additional resources. Coachingforinfluence.com is my home website. And recently I've started launching some online courses. So to this group, I'd love to make available a discount. If you're interested in taking any of those courses or signing up for them, there's a 20% discount. Just enter the code FALL 2021 and that'll be available to you. You can also sign up for a free PDF I have on my website on leadership and burnout in the workplace. As far as my coaching practice, there's really 3 things I provide. One-on-one coaching is the main thing I do. I also provide these online courses and trainings, and I'm a writer as well. And so the current book is How to Beat Burnout for Yourself, Your Family, and Your Team. That's where we've gotten a lot of this material today. And one of those courses actually is an audiobook course, meaning it's an audiobook or audio version of the book, How to Beat Burnout, that I've coursified. I've brought in some of those things that just help structure the learning and help you apply it. So hopefully that's something you can check out and it would be of value to you as you work with your clients. I'm going to stop just to ask, are there any questions or anything else I can provide for this group?
Please feel free to add any questions or comments to the chat. And while you do that, I do have a question for Stan, actually. Stan, what's the starting point to help a client create an environment that supports emotional wellness? What's your advice on this?
So there's a change model that I subscribe to called the ADKAR, ADKAR. It's an acrostic. So A stands for awareness, D stands for desire, K stands for knowledge, A is ability, skill, R is reinforcement. And the idea of the model is, although change isn't necessarily a purely linear experience, this model can show us where change gets stuck in a linear manner. Meaning if there's no awareness, there's not going to be change. If I'm aware but I don't care, desire, there's not going to be change. If I'm aware and I care but I don't know what to do, there's not going to be change. Again, going back to the story of when my wife had her car accident and I was trying to do all this stuff, I was having a lot of just anger, just to be honest. I was aware of it. I cared about it. I wanted to make a change. I didn't know what to do. What I did know is I had 2 little girls, and if I wasn't careful, they're going to end up marrying somebody like me. And I didn't like this version of me. Okay. So what did I do? I called a friend of mine who's a professional counselor and said, dude, we got to talk. I need some time on the books, man. And he helped me with the knowledge and the skills piece, the knowledge and the ability, right? And then the last piece is the reinforcement idea. What are the things we're putting in place to kind of help this stuff stick? So to your question, what can we do with our clients to help them develop a emotionally supportive environment? I think part of it is working through that ADKAR. Are they aware of the need for it? Are they aware of where they're at, right? Do they desire to take action on that? If not, then they're stuck. Do they know what to do? If they don't know what to do, then they're stuck. Do they have the skills needed to create that environment? If not, they're stuck, right? Or in the process of trying to create that environment, do they have things that actually reinforces that so it can be a lasting change? Does that help?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
In this day and age of COVID, everybody can speak about burnout.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a potential to change the vernacular so that it doesn't sound so negative? Somebody should write a book or a process. I'm throwing it out there, coaches. You might want to change the vernacular because everybody's burned out on COVID. So let's try as coaches, thinking toward the positiveness of something, to change the vernacular so that it makes it easier for people to speak about it. Because we just keep speaking about burnout, they're like, well, that doesn't have any, yeah, it's affecting everybody. So that's just a challenge for you. Maybe you might want to, find a way to switch the switch a little bit.
I think that's a great point, Patricia, that sort of nuancing what we're talking about. Is this worn out? Is this burnout? Is this about just feeling ineffective? And again, helping people then identify what's that more ideal state so that they can pursue it. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Hey, 5%.
Okay, yeah.
At least 5%. Look at Aurora just laughing.
Always a businesswoman.
Hey.
Yeah, my people will talk to your people and we'll see what we can work out.
Stanley, I just really appreciate all of the information that you shared with the coaches. It's important that we, as a chapter, continue to equip the body of coaches that we have in our membership. You did say something that was really powerful, and it is related to the fact that when coaches under the ICF competencies demonstrating ethical practice is the referrals, and that line it can sometimes be blurred, right? It can sometimes be blurred, but I'm just thinking about how we can continually create more synergy, like having Dr. Adams here. She's a doctor in psychology, and so being able to bridge those relationships so that we can provide a stronger, healthier referral system. So what I'm taking away from this conversation, in addition to the conversation of just determining how people are feeling and processing and taking action on I love the analogy of the maintenance, or whether they're truly broken down, is that intersection of how we continually work with our partners in the mental health space. So I know Susanna has been a great advocate for that. And I think that that's an area we need to continually hone in on during this time of coming, I think, out of the pandemic. Yes, we are coming out of that pandemic.
One way or another, yeah. Yeah, what I'm hearing is that the takeaway for me is, yeah, making sure that in my personal practice, I have a network of practitioners, right? It may be my personal practice, but it's got to have a network to be effective.
Well, and for the chapter too, because I represent the chapter. And so I think it's, creating those networks for the chapter.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, again, thinking about the case with the ADHD, just realizing, I'd like to think I can help this individual. I'm sure I can be helpful, but I'm not a specialist. Let's get you someone who's a specialist. Yeah.
And a case in point, the only reason that I know about this, and I just sent a message over to Dr. Adams, is the TMS. There are systems out there. There are techniques, the transcranial magnetic stimulation, that helps create those new neural pathways. Well, I only know that because I've had conversations with other doctors about that. And that's maybe something we have a conversation, Dr. Adams, you have a system, maybe you come back and you teach coaches on how that works, so that, our clients that may need to be referred to the, psychiatrist or psychologist or counselors can benefit from excellent systems like that. So.
Great point, Aurora, and great point, everyone. I have another question for Stan, because when you and I had that initial conversation about burnout, you mentioned something that I think needs to be addressed or explained a little bit. You talked about, one of the things coaches need to do with clients who are experiencing burnout or on the verge of burnout is create a new operating system for themselves. And I was wondering if you could explain that a little bit more.
Yeah. So I describe myself as a pole vaulter who, as I start to go over I'm up in the air, I'm holding on to the pole, and I'm about to go over the bar. And I look at the bar and I think, gosh, if I can get over this, it must not be that hard. I should probably grab onto this and raise it higher and then try to go over that. Then I'll have accomplished something. Okay, that's an operating system I have that does not serve me well. And so as I've worked with folks, especially in that executive space, if you're familiar with the DISC, right, the high D, driver, doer, dominator, man, they are just driven. Everything's about maximizing, optimizing. There is a point at which that way of doing life no longer serves them. Sometimes I also write on ethical leadership, right? So one of the struggles we get into in organizations is, you get what you measure, right? So if you're only measuring, say, the bottom line, and you're not measuring how we get there, okay, you're going to have the Wells Fargo situation of a few years ago, right? So that's what I mean by this idea of creating new operating systems. I do feel like coaching is especially helpful. It's a helpful discipline or tool to help folks do that. Another way to think about this is, you can go research going all the way back to the 1950s about challenges in leadership. People get their first promotions. Well, okay, let me back up. There's essentially 3 buckets that we can sort all of our leadership skills into. One bucket is the technical bucket, productivity, getting stuff done. The second bucket is the relational bucket, the human skills, human interaction. The third bucket is the conceptual skills, our ability to do the thinking work and the mindset shifts and things that are required. So your first successes, promotions, that kind of thing come from that technical bucket, your ability to just get things done. And so as human beings, we get an operating system that's all about getting things done. What happens in your journey as a leader, though, is as you take on more and more responsibility, or as you come up the organizational chart, the relational work and the conceptual work becomes even more important. And that's where the challenges lie. If my operating system only knows, if my skill set only knows how to do the technical work, that's not going to serve me. And the tragedy that I see over and over and over again is when leaders get into those challenges, they go back to relying on the things that worked for them in the past. You know, Marshall Goldsmith famously says, what got you here won't get you there. And so they're using an old operating system that's all about technical skills, production, getting stuff done, or maximizing, optimizing. That's not sufficient to meet the relational challenges or the conceptual challenges. And a conceptual challenge, by the way, would be an example of thinking in terms of what are we measuring? What's really important? How do we measure it? Okay. Does that answer the question?
Makes perfect sense. Yes. All right, before we wrap up, do we have any other questions or comments? Please don't be shy.
Dan, we're ready for you to come back and do version 2.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, you just, anytime, just tell me what you want, what you need. I will tell you also, I'm on the board for the Texas Coaches Coalition.
Oh, yeah.
We're a group that's working on putting together the All Coaches, All Texas Retreat and Conference. We're hoping to do at the end of March, beginning of April. And I'm the director of programs. So if any of you are interested in presenting at that event, please let me know. We're still looking for presenters for that event and anticipate being able to do it in person. So that's just another quick plug. Thank you.
And Stan, we want to thank you for your service in the Texas Coaches Coalition as well, because they serve a very important role in helping all the 4 Texas chapters do the best we can. And thank you for this wonderful presentation. I think we all learned so much from you today. And before we hang up and say goodbye, I would like to share with you just a couple of more announcements or reminders. So let me get here. And so we have several things coming up in the month of September that we don't want you to miss. On September 1st, that's our next membership orientation. So just join us for 30, 40 minutes to learn more about who we are, what we do. Consider perhaps joining our chapter. On September 2nd, we have another one of our series, Coaching Excellence. This is also focused on core competencies, and it's verbal stretching, a coaching tool to explore clients' words and meanings with Patty Porter. Patty Porter is a conflict coach. So having those really hard conversations. On September 7th, we're joining other chapters in the Southeast region in the United States to talk about body, brain, and behavior, the neurobiology of experiential coaching with Amanda Blake. And on September 17th, this is about to be published on our events page. And it's a partnership between the Association of Change Management Professionals and the International Coach Federation Texas chapters. We're going to talk about Leader Coach, the re-imaged leader. And there's also the opportunity to not just attend this session, but to attend the whole conference. And this, our theme, as you will notice at the bottom of the screen for this year, is Coach More, Coach Better, Coach Connected. Again, find out more about that on September 1st. We want to remind everybody that we have a mobile app called Wild Apricot. It's free. You can download the Apple as well as the Android version. And here you can sign up for events, track your CCUs, connect with other members and send messages to members, and just stay up to speed with everything that we're doing. In addition to that, we're very, very active on social media, and we have a Vimeo, YouTube, and SoundCloud channels. So all of our free events after the date of the actual live event will be on YouTube and SoundCloud, just like today's event. So look for it in the near future. And then if it's a paid event like Coaching Excellence or Southeast Regional Webinar Series, we upload them to video, and this requires a subscription. Last but not least, we ask you to like us, follow us, and send us your comments, share on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, Vimeo, SoundCloud, and Slack. So we're very present thanks to Aurora and all of these channels, and very active, by the way. And this wraps up our presentation today, our Coach Connect event. We want to thank all of you for being here, for participating, for your support. And especially we want to thank Stan for being here today, for sharing his time and knowledge and expertise with us. And thanks to you, Stan, we're going to be a little bit better coaches. We're going to coach better and know how to address some of the issues with burnout. So from our heart to your heart, thank you.